Hello friends, welcome to our session on web applications in Java. The agenda for today's session is Introduction to Web Applications in Java, Growth of the Web Programming Model. So there we'll be seeing the three levels of growth. Here we'll see the static document server model, which was the first one. Then we'll come to dynamic content generated by CGI script. Then dynamic web applications using servlets, JSP and J2EE. Then we'll continue with the architecture models for servlets. We'll see the model 1 architecture and model 2 architecture. Then in the model 2 architecture, we have model, view and controller components. So that we'll be covering that also. So this is what we are going to cover in this session. So next we'll come to the introduction to web applications. So the World Wide Web, it wasn't originally started as an application environment, but today internet is mainly used for web applications. Initially, it was just started for communication purpose, and today, especially for e-commerce and all, it's been used a lot. So that is why web applications are basically used. And in 1990, due to the World Wide Web and its associated hypertext transfer protocol, that is HTTP, it grew out of work done at the European Laboratories for Particle Physics, CERN. The first world web browser was written by Tim Berners-Lee, who developed HTTP as a networking protocol for distributing documents. And the system was used at CERN and other high-energy physics laboratories and universities in 91 and 92, and they grew steadily in popularity. In 93, the advent of the Mosaic browser led to the explosion of commercial web use. In 5 years, more than 650,000 web servers were in use worldwide with uncounted millions of users. So this is what is about web applications, and the Mosaic browser is the one which developed Firefox. We all know that. So now we'll come to the growth of the web programming model. So different levels of growth. The first one was the static document server model. The first operational model had the web server simply serving up the documents on request. So simple documents were what do you say, they were simply serving up the documents on request, each and every static documents. That's why it is called static documents, because the web applications always is in the form of a request response parameter. So a request goes to the server, and from the server the response is being taken. So as the request goes to the server, the HTML documents are taken back as response. Now, in this environment, the content doesn't change unless a human author supplies a new version of a document. Here, unless the human author provides supplies a new version of the document, till then there's no change in the environment. So this is what is the static document server, and this was the first model. Now, next we'll come to dynamic content generated by a CGI script. Here, the HTTP is a simple request response protocol which is used in web applications. So web applications, they use simple request response protocols. So from the web browser, the request goes to the server using the CGI bin program, and then here we are using from the CGI, just look at the diagram, using the CGI programming, the database, from the database data is retrieved. Here the CGI programming in web applications, it can be any scripting languages like Perl script, Ruby script, etc., and they were used to fetch data. So scripting languages were used to fetch data from the database. Now CGI is convenient, is a convenient source, but it has got one very big drawback, and that is it's paused as a new process for each HTTP request. So each request is a process, and the processes are heavy. And this isn't a problem when the traffic is low, but it creates a great deal of overhead when the traffic level increases. As the traffic level increases, the scalability of the program reduces if we use CGI. So that was the problem of CGI. And this being the case, CGI in general doesn't scale well. That is, scalability problem comes when we use CGI scripted programs. So this was a dynamic content process. However, due to the program, each and every time using the script, the data could be generated and retrieved to the web browser. Now, next we have the dynamic web applications using servlets, JSP and J2W. Here, this is the one which we using servlets. This was the first one using servlets. Here, the request from the server goes in the form of a request URI to the web server. The web server uses the servlet engine, and from there the request is taken either by the servlets or it can be the JSP pages. So the request can go to the J2E, then the servlets, they can use the J2W services and other services like messaging and mailing and all, and other J2W services can also be used. JMS like services can be used. Now that is what is the additional service that a servlet can use, and from the database the data is being retrieved. This is where we first came into the servlet part, and servlet is nothing but a Java code inside which we can write the HTML codes, and JSP is nothing but a HTML code inside which we can write Java code. So this is the way we can write. So you can use servlets or JSP pages for the processing. However, this was the latest development that happened, and so this was the way in which we came to servlets, and from the servlets only, after the web development came using servlets, then we formed the struts and the Spring frameworks and all generated, and there we could see different ways of doing it and bringing the frameworks. The program became much more easier, or compared to the servlet way of doing the web applications. So the development of the frameworks and all came after this development. So the web applications, the concept of the web applications, servlets is a very important turning point. Now, the two development architectures we have for servlets. Here we have the Model 1 architecture and the Model 2 architecture. These are the two architectures, and they prescribe different approaches to design JSP-based web applications. Now, the Model 1 architecture is, although conceptually simple, this architecture is not apt for large-scale application development because a great deal of functionality is duplicated in each JSP. So, although it's conceptually simple, this architecture is not apt for large-scale application development. Combining the business logic with the presentation logic makes it hard to introduce a new view or access the point in an application. So when you combine the business logic with the presentation logic, it makes it's hard to introduce a new view. So here you can see the diagram how the Model 1 architecture is working. From the browser, request goes to the servlet or the web container where we can use JSP pages or servlets. Here, then again, the request processing happens, data validation happens, business logic happens, data manipulation and response generation. Everything happens in the same container. So here from the database, data is retrieved and the response comes back to the browser. So this is what is development architecture. Next, here in this environment, the content doesn't change unless a human author supplies a new version of the document. Now we'll come to Model 2 architecture. The Model 2, or as it is most commonly referred to today, Model View Controller, It solves many of the inherent problems with the original Model 1 design by providing a clear separation of application responsibilities. So in the earlier Model 1 architecture, what all functions we had? The same thing is being divided into the model part, view part and the controller part in the Model 2 architecture. So here what happens is that the request goes to the controller, which is the servlet. From the servlet, the request processing happens and data validation happens. On the request processing part, the processing is done then it goes to the model part where the business logic and the data manipulation happens. So actually the functions are being called in the controller, but then the functions are written in the model part, and model is actually a POJO file, plain old Java object files, which are being simple Java files, which are being called in the which contains functions which are being called in the controller. Now, these that is the business logic and the data manipulation that is connecting it with the database. These functions happen inside the model, and the response goes to the, and then in the end we come to the controller, and the controller says which response has to be generated. That is where we have to move to. That is which JSP page or which servlet. Response can again be a JSP page or a servlet dependingly. And then if it is a JSP page or if it is a servlet, it has to be written in the controller. So after the model contains functions which are being called in the controller. In the controller, we come to know the request after the request processing which page where the response has to move to. So that also is written, and that response is actually the JSP. It's in the form of a JSP page most probably, or it can be a servlet, and then the response is given back to the browser. So this is what is the Model 2 architecture. Now, in the MVC architecture, a central servlet known as the controller receives all the requests for the application. Now, the controller then processes the request and works with the model to prepare any type of data by the view, which is usually a JSP, and forwards the data to a JSP. The JSP then uses the data prepared by the controller to generate a response to the browser. In this architecture, the business and the presentation logic are separated from each other. That is the basic speciality of this architecture, that the business logic and the presentation logic are separated from each other in the Model 2 architecture. Now, this separation provides excellent reuse of code. So we can reuse the code easily. Only if you need it, you can call it anywhere. So that is what is the Model 2 architecture. Now we'll come to the model. In the Model 2 architecture, we have a model component. I told you earlier, the model component is something where the business logic and the data manipulation happens. So in the MVC architecture, the model components provide an interface to the data or services used by the application. Thus, the model component provides the business logic, and the model components come in many different forms and can be as simple as a basic Java bean or as intricate as an enterprise Java bean or web services. So it can be a web service, or it can be EJB, or it can be a simple Java bean. However, it will contain the business logic, and any data manipulation functions written, they are also written in the model files, and these model files are simple Java files. Now we come to the view components. The view component, they are used in the MVC architecture to generate the response to the browser. Thus, a view component provides what the user uses. Oftentimes, the view components are simple JSPs or HTML pages, and this is one of the main design advantage of MVC. You can use any view technology that you'd like without impacting the model or business layer of your application. Okay, so we can use any view technology with the model or the business layer. And then view technology is where we get the response back and the JSP pages or the HTML pages which is seen in the browser of the user. Now, the web container also contains controller components. Now, what are controller components? The request from the user. It comes in the form of the request parameter is actually, it goes to the servlet. Servlet contains HTTP request and HTTP response parameters. So at the core of the MVC architecture are the controller components, and it is the controller which controls the whole program, because the controller is typically a servlet that receives the request for the app for the application, manages the flow of the data between the model and the view layer, and thus it controls the way the model and the view layers interact with each other. So the control is in the hands of the controller, because the request processing, the functions are written in the model component. After the processing and after the manipulation, after data validation, the response we get, that is after request processing, we get the response. For request processing, the functions are written in the model file, and then after the response is in the form of maybe in the form of a JSP page, it is a view component. So the response is in the view component, and the view component is so then from the controller, the response goes to the goes in the form of the view object. That is the JSP page. So that is the control of managing the model and the view layers is in the hands of the controller. So that is what is the controller's job. So this is what is all about the web applications. So I think this is, if you think it has been good enough, then please like, share and subscribe. Thanks for attending our session on web applications in Java. Thank you.